Good evening, as usual. Good to see all of you. We're going to begin, as we have before, with the recitation of the Heart Sutra, which Sunny is going to put up. And let me get out of the way here. There we go. No, go back to the Heart Sutra. There we go. Nope. Sunny, you had it to begin with. Okay. All right, there we go. Thus did I hear at one time. The Bhagavan was dwelling on massive Vulture's mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara. How should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra. Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty. Emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no touch, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element, and so on, up to and including no mind element, and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the endpoint of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared. Tadyata, gate, gate, para samgate, bodhi, svaha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is like that. It is like that. It is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom, just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagavan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara, those surrounding in their entirety, along with the worlds of gods, humans, asuras, Gandharvas, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised. That's spoken by the Bhagavan. So before you leave, could you put that back, Sunny? Sunny, could you put that page back? Okay, maybe she's not there. Okay, so a little further up here, okay, so it says, Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. I wanted to mention a little bit about that. You might say, no attainment. If there's no attainment, that's really bad news. What is it talking about? Anyone have an idea? What does it mean if there's no attainment? No one have an idea? So I can't see here. There we go. So what it means is that there's no inherently existent attainment. If you think there's some kind of attainment that's out there that can be gotten, some solid kind of thing, that can be an impediment to your gradual achievement of that. So I just wanted to mention that all of this, the meaning of the Heart Sutra is worthy of your time. If you have a chance, there are many discourses on the Heart Sutra you can find on YouTube, but if you look in the under my own name, I gave a series, I think, at Guya Samaja Center some years ago, a couple of years ago, that you can go into the meaning of all those details. Okay, you can take that down, Sunny. Thanks for your indulgence. So we're back again. I wanted to read to you a section from another Lan Rim text, which I would recommend very highly, by Yangtze Rinpoche. Yangtze Rinpoche, I think Doris and I were talking about him not so long ago, is the reincarnation of a great Tibetan Lama who had been Lama Yeshe's teacher and Geshe Zopa's teacher. And he was enthroned when I was, the first course I went to at Kopan in 1974. He was a little teeny boy. There's a video of his enthronement. And now he's, I don't know, he's like 6'5" or much taller than I. How tall is he, Paul? Do you know, Yangtze Rinpoche? So in his text, this is a very good one, and for the Lan Rim in general, because it's written in modern English, So I wanted to read this to you. He's on page 430. He says, when I finished my studies, he studied to become a geshe and was always top of his class. When I finished my studies, I went to help my teacher Geshe Zopa Rinpoche at Deer Park. At the center at the time, we didn't have a translator, so Geshe told me to go ahead and teach without one. I could only manage in English, how are you and where are you from? At the time in English. And I thought there was no way I could possibly teach the Dharma in English. I listened to so many cassettes of teachings by His Holiness with a translator, so he would understand what His Holiness was saying in Tibetan, and he was listening to the translator. I listened and thought to myself, how can this translator handle all those Indian masters' names, like Chandrakirti and Dharmakirti and all this other thing. To myself, I thought, I can't do this, but I didn't give up. These days, I can say Vasubandhu and Chandrakirti with no problem, Indian pundits' names, right? I think all of you will have the same experience. Just by hearing a couple of lectures or reading a few books on a topic, you shouldn't assume that you will understand all of these things right away. When you are grappling with a subject from a different tradition, from a different language, background, to think that you must learn and understand it all immediately can cause you to become very frustrated. you will be putting yourself through unnecessary trouble. At the beginning, the teachings on emptiness may sound like nothing but a whole lot of technical terms that don't make much sense. But later on, when you begin to get a feeling for it, you will start to understand that these terms relate directly to your own mind and are applicable to many situations in your life. I just wanted to mention that when we were talking earlier in the course about the experience of Newton, Sir Isaac Newton, having read a text, had to read it many, many times. So I had suggested to you that you read the text that we're doing every week. I don't know if anyone has done that, but every time you read it, it will start to make more sense. Okay, so any questions from last time? No, okay. So we're going to begin from where we left off. So we were talking about the four essential points, right? Recognizing the object of negation, establishing the pervasion, and then showing that if an inherently existent self existed, it would have to be either one with the aggregates, refuting that it's one with the aggregates, and refuting that it's different than the aggregates. Those are the four essential points. So we talked about quite a bit about the first, and we'd also talked a little bit about the establishing the pervasion. So that the expression establishing the pervasion, what's that talking about? It's talking about the necessity that if something was inherently existent, one of the things you could say is that it either had to be identical to the aggregates, or easier way of saying, rather than all five aggregates, it has to be identical to the body and mind, or different than the body and mind. That's the pervasion. And when it's called, when the expression ascertaining the pervasion means realizing it with pramana, with valid cognition, ascertaining by valid cognition. So it doesn't mean just coming to some general idea about the pervasion. If the self existed, if the self were inherently existed as it's appearing to you after you have recognized the object of negation in your own consciousness. And I put my finger at my heart chakra, because that's where when you start to get rid of the grosser states of mind, it's almost as though you're getting closer to the subtlemost mind at your heart chakra, but you don't have to be thinking of only that. When you recognize the sense of I in your consciousness, the object of negation, the object of the innate grasping, that is the subtlemost object of I, and then that's the first essential. The second essential is then recognizing that if it existed that way, it would either have to be one with the body and mind or different than the body and mind. That's the pervasion or the necessity. So when it's said ascertaining the pervasion, that means ascertaining it with valid cognition. So what that means is you can have a progression. At the beginning, you might think that inherently that I that I'm sensing, yeah, that exists. That would be what's called wrong consciousness, right? An erroneous, in Tibetan we say lokshe. There's a subject matter that we study, course that some of the people here attended not so long ago, called the Ways of Knowing. So we talked about 7 ways of knowing, a kind of progression of development of mind from wrong thought, say, believing that the I is inherently existent, and then having it proposed to you that if the I existed that way, it would either have to be one with the aggregates or different than the aggregates. You might raise in your consciousness a doubt. Oh, maybe, let me see, if it had to be one with the aggregates or different than the aggregates, you could have a doubt about whether it actually existed the way that you were believing before. You might start with a doubt leaning in the wrong direction. Oh, maybe it doesn't exist. Maybe it does exist, but it probably does exist. That is to say, the inherently existent I. That would be a doubt leaning in the wrong direction. You might have a later an equaled, a balanced doubt. You know, maybe this I exists, maybe it doesn't. I don't know. You know, I'm not sure. Later, as you start to understand more, you can have a doubt leaning in the right direction. Maybe it exists, maybe it doesn't. Maybe probably doesn't exist, the inherently existent I. So the reason I'm mentioning this is if you're talking about the pervasion, at first you might have a wrong idea that there's no pervasion, that the I would have to be either one with the aggregates or different than the aggregates. Later, you might have a doubt once it's proposed to you that, you know, Nagarjuna and others, you know, great, you know, scholars and practitioners stated that it would have to be one or the other. So you might have a doubt. Again, you could start with a doubt leaning in the wrong direction. Oh, they say that, but probably doesn't have to be one of those. It might be something else. Then you might have an equal balanced doubt. And then finally, a doubt leading in the right direction. This is, so in ascertaining the pervasion, this is not yet an ascertainment of the pervasion. You have a doubt leading in the right direction. Probably it would have to be one with the aggregates, or let's say, put it more simply, probably it would have to be one with the body and mind or different than the body and mind. That's still a doubt, right? That's not called ascertaining the pervasion. You have to improve upon that. You can develop what's called a correctly assuming consciousness, you know, as a basis, having thought it probably is one with the body and mind. There's probably a pervasion that it would have to be one with the body and mind or different than the body and mind. That's still the doubt. Then you could think it is. You know, you come to the conclusion, you have a correct belief or correct assumption or presumption that it is, but not based on a perfect reasoning, not based on perfect reasons. That itself is not ascertaining the pervasion. You have to go beyond that and develop through your logical mind, your logical thinking, a certainty through logic that it would have to be one with the aggregates or different than the aggregates. Last time we gave example of a Venn, is it the right term? Venn diagram? You know, if you have two sets, two circles that have different elements, one represents the aggregates, one represents the self. They would either have to be identical or different. By different, it doesn't mean that they have to be separated, those two diagrams. Even if they're not exactly identical, they're different, right? Sunny, what do you think? Sunny O'Neill?
Yes.
Yeah, does it make sense? That
Yes,
kind of reasoning, then you could develop certainty about that. You could develop, you know, you could say that you ascertain the pervasion with valid cognition. That's the second essential point. So we talked about that last time. Then we began to talk about the third essential point. Now, the first two have to go in that order. You have to first recognize the object of negation. Second, you have to establish the pervasion. Third and fourth, you can do in either order. You can check whether it is one with the aggregates or different than the aggregates, and either order you want. Here we start with refuting that it is one with the aggregates, right? Following? Snehi, you okay? Adriana, you look a little bit, okay. So in this, the third essential point, establishing the self is not inherently one with the aggregates. I'll just read a little bit what we talked about last time. Previously, the I, the phenomenon designated to the aggregates, which is the basis of designation, seemed to exist as if self-established and indistinguishable from the aggregates. Remember we talked about before. Through having practiced this second essential, the establishing the pervasion, the former consciousness ascertaining the appearance of the I cannot remain as it is, and there arises a little doubt about whether the I is the same or different than the aggregates. So first of all, you had a wrong thought that it did exist that way. It did exist inherently. Now you begin to, having understood the pervasion, there's a little doubt in the mind whether it's the same or different than the aggregates. It's not sufficient just to doubt, that's just what I was talking about, whether the I and the aggregates are the same or different. A decision must be reached. You have to ascertain with valid cognition whether it is the same or different. Well, you have to ascertain with valid cognition that there is a pervasion. It has to be one or the other, just as we start to say Venn diagram or something like that. Therefore, you should analyze thinking first that the I, which is conceived by the inborn conception of true existence, inborn, this innate grasping to the I, we're talking about the object of that. The I, which is conceived by the inborn conception of true existence, might be one with the body and mind. That's the third essential point. You're investigating that. In that case, the I could not be anything else except either one with the body or one with the mind. Right? If it's because there is a duplicity here, right? Body and mind. You could make it into five aggregates. It would have to be either inherently one with one of the five aggregates, or inherent, we were talking about inherently one. Here we're just saying we're breaking it down into two, body and mind. In that case, the I could not be anything else except either one with the body or one with the mind. I think that was a question Jennifer had asked last time, right? Weren't there some other alternatives? If you have ascertained the pervasion, then there won't be a doubt that it could be anything else. As I mentioned before, sometimes other things are elaborated, like when you talk about 7-point analysis, other things like maybe it's the shape of the aggregates or something else, but they're not necessary. There is a pervasion that it either has to be one with the aggregates or different than the aggregates. These other things are brought up simply to sort of relieve other doubts, nagging doubts in your mind. If the I were one with the body, it would make no sense to say my body, right? If the I was one with the body, why not? Because the I would be the body. You would have to say my I instead of saying my body, because the body would be the self, right? Or you would have to say the body's body, because the I would be the body. Does that make sense? Sheila, are you following? Yeah?
I'm trying to follow, yes.
Trying to follow, okay. Also, you would have, okay, so it would not be sensible to say my body from the point of view of affixing an attribute, body, to the base I. So you can take the I as the base and you can affix an attribute to it. Also, you would have to say my I or the body's body. Generate certainty or ascertainment that this is the same also if the I were one with the mind. So this is a very famous sort of line of reasoning when you talk about the third essential point, that it is not inherently one with the body and mind. Because if it were one with the body and mind, it would either have to be one with the body or one with the mind. So we'll treat those separately. This is still the third essential point. If it were one with the body, it would make no sense, because generally we talk about, we talk about our own experiences. We talk about my body. Oh, my body oh, my face looks clean today, or my body looks, a little bit overweight, or my body looks a little bit thin, or whatever. So you wouldn't be able to say my body if the I, in this case we're using the pronoun my body. If the I were the body, you couldn't say my body, because the I and the body would be one and the same, right? Also with the mind, oh, my mind is a little bit cloudy today. Oh, my mind is upset. My mind, you wouldn't be able to say my mind. It would make no sense. In essence, there's a difference between the sense of self and the body. So this sense of difference between the body and the mind refutes the possibility that the I could be inherently one with the body, or could be inherently one with the mind. Make sense? Okay. No? Someone have a doubt?
Could you just say it again, Venerable?
Yeah.
The last part.
So we're talking about the third essential point here, right? We're trying to ascertain or develop certainty, realize that the I could not be inherently one with the body, or it could not be inherently one with the mind. We take those two examples because we said it can't. If the I existed, the third essential point, it would have to be inherently one with the body and mind, and we take those two separately because if we refute that it could be one with the body and refute that it could be one with the mind, then we eliminate the possibility that it could be inherently one with the body and mind. So if you say, you have a sense of your body, someone says, they compliment you, oh, you lost some weight. And you think, my body, oh yeah. You wouldn't be able to have that conceptual difference of thinking of the body being a possession of the self if the self were the body. You wouldn't have the thought, my body. Think about that for some time. It may not be something that you have, you've ordinarily thought about. Also, the mind. If someone says, "Oh man, you're smart, you know a lot," and you think, "My mind is very sharp." We do have that expression. We do talk about that conventionally. My mind is sharp, or it's dull today, or whatever. But you wouldn't be able to say that if the I was inherently one with the mind, because there would be no difference between the I and the mind. You couldn't have a possessor of the mind, the I, that's different than the mind, if they're one and the same. You would have to be saying the mind's mind, because the I would be mind, M-I-N-D, right? Makes sense now? Maybe not completely clear. Something to think about, to contemplate again and again. If having thought thus, your attempt at understanding is merely verbal, which it probably is for some of us right now, right? You say, well, he says that and it makes sense verbally, but I don't really understand. And you do not gain strong conviction that the I could not be one with the body and could not be one with the mind. If you don't have conviction of that yet, think about the following verse from Nagarjuna's fundamental text called Wisdom, or Fundamental Wisdom, Mula Prajna, Mula Madhyamaka Karaka. So the quotation is, when it is taken that there is no self except the appropriated aggregates, remember we talked about last time, appropriated aggregates. When it is taken, that means if you assume that there's no self except for the appropriated aggregates, that it is the aggregates, in other words, the appropriated aggregates themselves are the self. If so, your self is non-existent. That's just sort of saying in a logical way what we were just saying. What does this mean? Because the I and the aggregates would be inherently one, they would be one in all respects with utterly no division. Therefore, they would be none other than partless. You could not then present in relation to that partless one two different things. This is just what we were talking about. Like you're saying, my mind. There are two things: the my, which is the appropriator, and the body or the mind, which is that which is appropriated. You know, as we're talking about my mind or my body. You could not then present in relation to the partless one the two different things: the I, appropriator of the five aggregates, and the five aggregates which are appropriated by it. Therefore, an assertion of my body or my mind or my aggregates would be senseless. This is no different than what we just said before. It's just elaborating it onto the five aggregates rather than just body and mind. Making sense, Larry? What are you thinking? Sheila's cat gets it.
Well, I have a doubt.
Okay, good. What is that?
There's simply no way I could say I don't exist, and I've never been, and I've always been the same person.
Right? There's no way that you could say that you don't exist.
Yeah.
That part I can understand. Then the second part, that what?
I have always been the same person.
You've always been the same person. So the Larry Biddinger, is that it, right? Biddinger?
Mhm.
Right now, how old are you, Larry?
About 76.
76. We're same age. Okay. Okay. So the Larry Biddinger now, who's 76, is the same as the Larry Biddinger when you were 3 years old.
Yes.
So the Larry Biddinger, when you were 3 years old, had the same wisdom that you have now, had the same life experiences.
Oh, I change all the time.
Yeah, so you're not the
My
same.
identity is always the same.
Yeah, but you know, there is a continuity of self, which is constantly
No, there's
changing.
no continuity. My experience is all over the place. Nothing hangs together.
So what I mean by continuity is that the self of one instant, the Larry of one instant, is impermanent and gives rise to the next instant of Larry, which is slightly different. It's maybe one instant
Very
older.
different. Very
After
different.
some instance, it may have had some new experiences that Larry never had before. If
Yeah.
you have a teenage daughter or son that says, you know, you're a jerk, I hate you, maybe you never had that experience before. So there is a continuity of self of a similar type. You can always say that, as you were saying, that there's something the same about me, but you're not
Identity is
exactly the
always
same.
Yes.
Pardon?
Identity is always the same. Identity of anything must be the same. That's what
I'm not sure.
identity is.
I'm not sure why you're stressing that point. Let's say this mug of mine.
Yeah.
Is it the same as it was when I first purchased it?
No.
So it's not the same.
No, it is.
It doesn't have this. It has
Same
there
mug.
is a continuity of. You don't like the word continuity? Continuity here means over time, right?
Gradual change. Yeah.
So there is a continuity, like in a stream. There is a continuity of water flowing through the stream, presuming that it doesn't.
But, identity doesn't change gradually. It's still
Come
the
again?
same. It's still your mug. Identity doesn't change gradually.
The continuity doesn't change. Say when you were born, when you were first conceived in the mother's womb, maybe when you came out of the womb, let's start there, where you were given the name. Someone said, what is it, your child's name? Is it Felix? Is it Samuel? And they said, no, Larry. We're calling him Lawrence or Larry. That basis for calling Larry has a continuity.
Yeah. Well,
It is
Sure.
changing moment by moment, like a stream. So we have the idea that that there's some kind of maybe inherent, we have an innate grasping to kind of inherent existence. Go ahead.
concept.
Concept, yeah. Grasping, concepts, conceptual.
Identity. Yeah.
But that is something which is just changing moment by moment. It's not inherently existent. It's not remaining the same all the time.
Mm.
Okay, so let's leave
Wow.
that for a little while. I don't want to belabor that too much. We'll come back to it later if it doesn't seem to be resolving. Min2 has a question that I didn't address before. Min2, what's your thought?
Yeah, I have a quick question. So basically, what in our mind, in a popular conception of the self.
I can't quite catch what you're saying. Get a
Can you
little
hear-
closer to your microphone. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. A
Okay.
little bit.
Okay, let me actually turn off my air purifier.
Turn
Okay.
off your air purifier, Min2.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I have a So basically, what we are saying is that in our popular imagination, right?
In our what? Popular imagination?
Imagination, right?
In our
So we think
imagination?
about a cell, there's like a soul that actually reside in a body, and that soul is impermanent. It's a permanent, and when we die, the soul leave the body and go to heaven. Now, what you're saying is that if the soul exists, it has to be 100% with the arrogant. Is that what you're saying?
Okay, so the word you're using, soul, is a legitimate translation for self. Okay.
Right.
When we talk about the self, in Christian theology, they may make a differentiation between self and soul, but generally the word soul is what is often translated as atma.
Right.
So when we talked about self before, the way we're translating atma or dak in Sanskrit or Tibetan is we say self, but you could just as well say soul. Okay, so if the self, maybe that's what Larry's thinking about, a sense of some kind of, constant kind of thing, irregardless of the changes moment by moment and so forth. If the soul existed the way that it appears as existing by its its own self, not just a name that's given to the collection of parts. We have a feeling that there really is some kind of inherently existent soul or inherently existent self. That inherently existent self would have to be either, would have to be either one with the aggregates or different than the aggregates. That was the privation. And then the first, refuting the first part of that privation, that it's not inherently one with the aggregates. We can take the aggregates as simply two in this case, the body and mind. The self would have to be inherently one with the body and mind, or different than it would have to be inherently one with the body and mind. If it were one with the body and mind, it would have to be either one with the body or one with the mind. We're breaking it down into more easily digestible elements. And we can see fallacies in either case. If it were inherently one with the body, if it were inherently one with the body, we wouldn't be able to say that I, the appropriator of the body, the owner of the body, we couldn't say my body. You know, I own the body, because the I and the body would be one and the same. They would be, if they're inherently one, there could be no difference between them.
Right. So I guess in this case, my question is that why is the privation logically correct? You know, because in our case, we imagine that the soul or the self is like a charioteer, it's like a puppet. You know, this body is like a flesh puppet, and this guy, the soul, is in the control of the puppet, and so the soul is not quite with the body, but yet it can still interface with the body in some way.
Right. So this is the kind of thing that we're investigating here. Okay, we haven't yet talked about the possibility that, you know, refuting the possibility that it's different. Here we're just saying that it can't be the same, because you wouldn't be able to say my body or my mind. Okay, then you might be led by that to jump to the other things. Well, therefore it has to be different than the body and mind. But there's a crucial point here. The fact that in the first essential point, you've recognized that how this self is appearing to you is though it were inherently existing, inherently existent. Therefore, it would, if it were different than the body and mind, it would have to be inherently different than the body and mind, utterly different than the body and mind. It could have no relationship to the body and mind. We haven't got to that point yet. Leave that thought for the time being. Let me just read a little bit further. When we'll talk about the fourth essential point, we delve into that.
I see. So if it is inherently the same as the body and the mind, then you say it makes no sense, because the body and mind change all the time, and the soul is supposed to be something that
No. That there is some. That's not the point that's being made here. If it were inherently one with the body, you couldn't have a sense of a self that is the appropriator of the body, the owner of the body, the possessor of the body. You know, the thing that says my body. If the self were the body, that would make no sense. That would not be feasible to say my body, because the body would be the self.
I see.
Okay, leave that for the time being. Let me go a little bit further.
Okay. Thank you.
So you can take down your hand so I don't get distracted. Because the I and the aggregates would be inherently one, they would be one in all respects, with utterly no division. Therefore, they would be none other than partless. If they're inherently one, they would be partless. These are things that you can think about and get certainty of these. You could not then present in relation to that partless one, the two different things, the I, which is the appropriator of the five aggregates, and the five aggregates which are appropriated by it. Now it's delving into the terminology of five. You could just say, you know, you couldn't say there is the body, which is appropriated by the I, that is my body, or you couldn't say my mind if they were utterly one, if they were inherently one. Therefore, an assertion of my body or my aggregates would be senseless. Okay? It is, if this also does not get to the heart of the matter, that is to say, you still have doubts. You're still thinking about this. Larry has doubts. Mintu has doubts. Then if this does not get to the heart of the matter, think that because the I and the body are one, if they were one, if the body and the I were one, after death, when the body is burned, the I would be burned. When the body's cremated. Okay. Is that the case? Well, some people might say, yeah. When Grandma Gwen was cremated, even though she's already dead then, she no longer exists. She was burned. Or, so what's the counter? Here it's almost saying, it's assuming that you know something else. It's assuming that you know that the self continues even after the person has died, from a Buddhist perspective, right? Maybe other religions wouldn't accept this. The person, the self, continues to exist and will transmigrate, will continue on. So even though the body is burned, the I is not burned. But there would be an absurd consequence. If the I was inherently one with the body, then the I would be burned at the time of cremation. Yeah. The I would be identical to the body. Or just as the I transmigrates to the next birth, this is assuming the Buddhist understanding, right? Therefore, the body would also have to transmigrate. Why? Because the I would be inherent. You're assuming the I is inherently one with the body. If it were inherently one with the body, then as the I transmigrates to the next rebirth, the body would have to transmigrate because they're inherently one. So these are other ways of looking at it. It's sort of like when you do what do you call it? Analytical meditation. Generally you can say there are two kinds of meditation: analytical meditation and stabilizing meditation. Analytical meditation is when you look at something in different ways to try to understand it very well. So here we're analyzing the defects if the I were inherently one with the body or inherently one with the mind in many different ways. And that can start to give some insight. You can start to see it in its totality, the absurdity of that position. Or just as the body does not transmigrate, so the I would not transmigrate. That's another thing. If the body and mind were inherently one, because the body doesn't transmigrate, does not go into the next life, the body of this lifetime, it's left here behind. If the I were inherently one with the body, the I could not transmigrate. This is all of these absurdities come about because of this is the essential word inherently. If it were inherently one, okay. Consider the application of such fallacies. Ron, are you getting a headache? You okay?
No, I'm with you.
Okay. Through having meditated thus, you will come to think the I is probably not the same as the body. Is that the third essential point? Or part of the third essential point? Probably is just still a doubt. It's not even a correct assumption, right? A presumption. It's certainly not a valid cognition. The I is, then if you come to think the I is probably one with the mind, because it's not one with the body, think about the following faults. The suffering of cold arises when the eye is without clothes. And the suffering of hunger and thirst arise when the eye lacks food and drink. Therefore, if after death, the mind were born in a formless realm where there's no food or drink, right? There's no form. Then because the mind would be one with the eye, or the eye would be one with the mind, it would still have to make use of gross forms such as food and clothing. This particular line of reasoning doesn't move me as much as another one when you talk about the oneness of mind, of the I and the mind. If the I were one with the mind, inherently one with the mind, because the mind has many, many parts, virtuous minds, non-virtuous minds, former moments of mind, present moments of mind, future moments of mind, concentrated states of mind. You would have different kinds of I if the I and the mind were inherently one. And we don't think that. We don't think that we have different I's at different times. It's kind of like Larry's feeling there is an I that's always there. That is just the I imputed upon the aggregates. The above modes of reasoning are suitable and easy to develop for beginners. You might say, uh-oh. Suitable and easy to develop, you might say, who's he talking about? However, if you have been disciplined through discriminating wisdom, a little more elaboration will decide the matter. Therefore, think of the fallacies of the selves becoming many. This to me is something that's sort of more decisive in my own mind. Chandrakirti's Madhyamaka Vatara, here is translated as supplement. 1 second, Mintu, says, if the self were the aggregates, if they're inherently one, then because there are many, the aggregates are many, those selves would be many. This is what I was talking about the mind a moment ago. As the mind has different kinds of parts, there would have to be many different I's according to each of those parts. If the I were one with the aggregates, there would have to be an I for the form aggregate, one for the feeling aggregate, different I for the discrimination aggregate, and so forth. Or alternatively, just as the aggregates are 5 in number, why do they have to be 5? Because every person is imputed on a basis of those 5 parts. Just like you would say that a car has certain kinds of parts, the metal parts, the glass, the rubber, the petroleum, and so forth, leather or other material in the seats. Just as the aggregates are 5, so the I would also become 5. You would have five cells. Or just as the I is no more than 1, you only have 1 I, then there would have to be only 1 aggregate. Okay, Minto, you have another question. Minto.
Oh, I have a question. Basically,
I'm close to your your microphone. Yeah.
Okay. So basically, when we talk about intrinsic existence, do we?
Comment to what?
When we talk about intrinsic existence,
Intrinsic inherent existence, right?
Inherent existence, do we also imply that whatever object that is intrinsic existence also has to be constant or unchanging in some sense?
Yes. It's that would be a logic if something were inherently existent. And I say if it were, because from the Prasangika point of view, from the highest philosophical point of view, there is nothing that is inherently existent. But if you broach the subject, if it were inherently existent, it couldn't change, because it would exist as one partless thing for all time. It wouldn't be amenable, it would not be amenable to change. How is that? Say, for instance, if there were two instants of the self, if they're inherently existent, they would have to be inherently one. You couldn't change from being happy to unhappy. You couldn't change from being hot to being cool. You would remain in that same state as existing from its own side, not dependent on any causes or conditions. Okay, good question. So leave it again. Similarly, Nagarjuna's fundamental wisdom, this is the Prajna chapter 17, verse 1 says, if the self were the aggregates, if the self was one with the aggregates, it would have production and disintegration. Now you might say, what's wrong with that? The self is produced and disintegrates moment by moment, right? But it means a little bit different than that. Because the five aggregates would be inherently produced, that's the crucial word here, inherently produced, and would inherently disintegrate, you would have to assert that the I also is inherently produced and inherently disintegrates. That means if something is inherently produced, that means it continually is produced. Because it is, the inherent means by its very nature, it's not changing. The I of the former birth and the I of this life can only be either the same or different, right? What do you think, Larry? The I of your former life, or it said the I of Larry when he was 4 years old, and the I of Larry when he is 76 years old, can only be either the same or different. If the same, as you're saying, through the force of their being inherently one, the sufferings in the former life, or the sufferings of Larry when he was 4 years old, being deprived of a lollipop, or I don't know what you might have been suffering about. The sufferings of the former life or the former moments as an animal, such as stupidity and enslavement for others' use, would also be experienced on the occasion of the eyes being a human in this birth. Also, the human pleasures of this life would have been experienced as an animal in the former life, because they're inherently one. So the experiences now as an adult, if we take, rather than taking former life and this life, taking about the present moment now and when you were 4 years old, the pleasures of this life, the pleasures that you have now of solving, what is it, Wordle? Does anyone do Wordle? I know a couple of people there. Yeah. I know, yeah. Where I'm trying to see where Doris is. Is Doris? Yeah, there. I know Doris, she sent me her, her scores sometime. So the pleasure of doing, or do you do Wordle, Larry? Larry Bittinger? Crossword puzzle?
What?
Do you do, there's a phenomenon.
Wordle?
Yeah,
No, I don't
Wordle.
do it. No,
Okay.
I don't know what
You
it
do
is.
crossword puzzles?
No. No.
Do you do mathematical, do you have any kind of amusements that are intellectually challenging?
I read Tsongkhapa.
Okay, so if the Larry now and the Larry of 4 years old were inherently one, the Larry of 4 years old would have to read Tsongkhapa, maybe before you learned how to read. So the human pleasures of this life would have been experienced as an animal in the former life. Think of such absurdities. These are the absurdities, fallacies, if the I and the aggregates were inherently one. Similarly, Chandrakirti's Madhyamaka Vatara, the supplement, this is chapter 6, verse 61, the last two lines says, whatever are inherently separate are not suitable to be included in one continuum. Oh, here's another concept, interesting. Whatever are inherently different or separate are not suitable to be included in one continuum. If the I of the former birth and the I of the next birth are inherently different, they would be totally unrelatedly different. I thought I had a note here. This is now the third, this is now the, yeah, this is the, actually, this is now talking about the fourth essential point. If the I of the former birth and the I of the next birth, so let's say the I of this life and the I of the next life are inherently different. We've already gone over the fallacies or absurdities if they're inherently the same. Now we're talking about if they're inherently different. If they're inherently different, they would be totally unrelatedly different. Therefore, it would be impossible to remember, I was born in a former birth as such and such. What does that mean? The Buddha in the Jataka tale says, in the former life, I was born as that prince, or I was born as that animal, or so forth and so on. Because if they're inherently different, they would have no recollection of that. There would be no reason to center on that previous continuity of life. Just as Devadatta does not remember that he was born in a former birth as his contemporary Yajna. Okay, so here's it. So does everyone know who Devadatta was? Snehi, do you know who Devadatta was? If you're speaking, you're unmuted, but I can't hear you for some reason. I can see you're unmuted. Maybe your microphone's not working. Okay, it doesn't matter. Devadatta was a cousin of the Buddha, right? Devadatta was the son of Buddha's father had a brother. Devadatta was the son of the father's brother. Siddhartha was the son of the king. So they were cousins. Devadatta also, when the Buddha left home and started becoming recognized as a great being, Devadatta, along with several of the other relatives, left the kingdom to become disciples. So they became disciples of the Buddha. But the Devadatta had always had a relationship with the Buddha of competition, always trying to outdo him as a child. The Buddha was always superior. Siddhartha was always superior. Devadatta was jealous from many, many lifetimes before. So Devadatta was particular mind, particular being. Just as Devadatta does not remember that he was born in a former birth as his contemporary Yajna. Who was Yajna? Paul, do you know who Yajna was? Yajna was another one of the royals who came. Yajna means Devadatta means given by the gods, right? Bestowed by the gods. Yajna is bestowed by fire. So it refers to the, when you make sacrifice and so forth. But it was the name of a person, two individual persons, Devadatta and Yajna. So they're independent of one another, right? They're not, they're maybe related by birth or something like that, but they are separate people. So can Devadatta remember that in a previous life he was born as Yajna? No, because there's separate mind streams, right? That's what this is talking about. Therefore, it would be impossible, say, if the I of the former birth and the I of the next birth are inherently different, they would be totally unrelatedly different if they were inherently existent. Therefore, it would be impossible to remember I was born in a former birth as such and such. Just as Devadatta does not remember that he was born in a former birth as his contemporary Yajna. Paul, you having an apprehension? Mintu, you've asked, someone else has to ask two questions before you get a third, okay? Furthermore, the self's accumulating actions for birth in a happy migration would be wasted. What does that mean? Ashley wants to ask a second question. That will give you the chance. Let me finish this first. Right now, we can accumulate merit to be born as a god in the future, or to be born as a human again with a human, perfect human rebirth and so forth. If the self, furthermore, if the self were inherently different than the aggregates, for the self's accumulating actions for birth in a happy migration would be wasted, because another would enjoy the here it says fructification. What do you say? The maturation of the effects in a life of high status. Sometimes people think that also right now. They say, why should I work for future rebirths? I'll be a different person then. Right? But there is a continuity of life, and that the same question that Larry was asking, broaching upon before. There is a continuity, but they are different, but they're not inherently different. If they were inherently different, the life of this life and the life of a future life, the actions that you create now would not ripen upon you. They would ripen upon someone who is inherently different than you. Why? Question asked. The agent of the actions and the experiencer of the effects would not be included into the base of a mere I, a nominally existent I, a merely imputed I, and would be unrelated. Ashley, what do you think? You have a question?
Well, I've heard you say this multiple times throughout these teachings of under the Buddhist assumption that there's a continuity. Does Buddhism, do any of these teachings, because I feel like when we were at Geshe Sopa's class, I feel like that Madhyamaka Avatara text maybe had an argument for why there would be a continuity. But I think like currently in the scientific community, the consensus would be that the mind is a emergent quality of the brain.
An epiphenomenon.
So why, do you have to appeal to these assumptions to make this case?
No, so what we talk about here is some kind of knowledge that's already presupposed. So we talk about continuity. So the person of one instant acts as the as that person disintegrates, there arises a person the next instant, shortest instant of time, as a result of the disintegration of the former instant. So for instance, right now, the Ashley of 8:10 in the East Coast here, is that exactly the same as the Ashley at 8:09? No, it's changed, right? It's different, but it is a continuity that has arisen because of the disintegration of the former moment.
But that still doesn't
Wait.
Okay.
So there's more to be talked about here. So we're talking about the continuity of rebirth and so forth, continuity of life. So when we talk about the continuity of mind, one instant of mind arises from the previous instant of mind. It is not exactly the same. It is different, but it is not inherently different. If it were inherently different, by its very nature, it would have no relationship to the previous moment of mind. At the time of death, we say that every instant of mind gives rise to another instant of mind as its result when it disintegrates. So it is said that at the last moment of conscious existence, the last moment of mind of this lifetime, that has to give rise to another moment of consciousness, which is not the same, it's different, but it is not inherently different. That's how we talk about a continuity of mind. So that even at the moment of death, there will be a continuity of consciousness. So when we talk about rebirth, and past and future lives and so forth, there's actually a logical proof set forth by Dharmakirti and Dignaga about the continuity of consciousness, even at the end of one lifetime. So the last moment of this lifetime can give rise to the next moment of the next life, you might say, let's say in the Bardo state, in the intermediate state. So this is something that one can take on faith on one level. If you believe that the Buddha was a perfect teacher, say having analyzed about emptiness and selflessness and seen the incredible benefits of that understanding, that you can overcome the delusions and so forth, realizing that the Buddha was a perfect teacher, and why, if he taught this incredibly profound teaching of emptiness perfectly that no one else had taught, why would he have dissembled, if you want, lied about continuity of life, rebirth and so forth? That's one level. Or you can use these logical reasonings to determine that there is a continuity of life. One of the teachers of the Dalai Lama, Serkon Senchab Rinpoche, I've mentioned this in some other talk. Serkon Senchab Rinpoche was the Lama with the very long ears, who, when who was it? George Lucas, I guess? No, who was it that made Star Wars? Was it George Lucas? George Lucas went to India. He had a chance to meet Serkon Rinpoche, and he used Serkon Rinpoche as the model for Yoda. Do you know who Yoda was? Sort of long ears, very wise, sort of. So Serkon Senchab Rinpoche said the logical reasonings for the existence of past and future lives, the continuity of life from one to another, never really sort of gave that moisture, that taste, never really moved his mind. But he said he knew the 13th Dalai Lama. And when the 13th Dalai Lama passed away and was recognized as the 14th Dalai Lama, and he met him, he knew, he said, I knew this was the same person. You might say, you know, maybe he was fooled or something like that. I gave the example of knowing Lama Yeshe in previous life before he passed away. Lama Yeshe, when I left Kopan to go to England, to Manjushri Institute, I came to Lama, I made 3 prostrations and asked him if there was any advice he had. And he said, he thought for a minute, he said, intellectual Mount Meru isn't worth caca, right? So many years talking about the, you know, the fact that just having intellectual knowledge isn't even worth as much as caca, which you could at least use for fertilizer. So he was talking about trying to integrate the teachings, use the teachings to tame your own mind. Many years later, when Lama passed away, and I met the reincarnation of Lama Yeshe, who's called Lama Osel. When he was a little boy, he was in Italy driving his tricycle. He was maybe 4 or 5 years old. And he was, you know, going around the courtyard, people were talking to him. And then he came by me, we were alone. And I said, Lama, do you have anything to tell me? And he whispered in my ear, he said, I don't know anything about caca. Lama Yeshe had said, you know, talking about intellectual Mount Meru isn't worth caca. So Lama Yeshe, Lama Osel was telling me, you know, I don't have any kind of intellectual pretensions, just using this knowledge. I'm trying to experience this. So to me, that was the same kind of experience as Serkon Rinpoche said when he met the 14th Dalai Lama, he knew that was the same person. So there are different ways that you can go about this. Sometimes it may be just on the level of faith or belief, or you can try to use logical reasonings to prove the existence of past and future lives.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of faith.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Faith is important though. Faith is something, is a mental factor that actually
Yeah, but
causes
that everyone uses faith.
No, I'm talking about the mental factor faith. Mental factor faith is a, if you have a chance to study mind and mental factors, is a particular state of mind that causes the other delusions, worries, and so forth to diminish, and you could be left in a clear and lucid state. So enough of that, enough of that. Let's go a little bit further, okay? Okay, therefore, if an action accumulated in a former life brought help or harm in this life, okay, my previous rebirth, something that I did then brought something beneficial or harmful now. Maybe I stole in a previous life and now my things are stolen, or I killed, and so there's some karma that I might be harmed in this lifetime. If an action accumulated in a former life brought help or harm in this life, you would be meeting with the effects of an action not done by yourself if the I was inherently existent. Because the I of this life would be unrelatedly connected to the former life. It would have no connection at all. That you would be meeting the effects of actions not done by yourself. If help and harm did not arise from deeds done, right? Help and harm, that means beneficial things, a result of karma, or harmful things as a result of karma did not arise from deeds done, there would be no sense in abandoning sins and engaging in virtues in this life, because their effects would not ripen for the future I. Okay. Through thinking such, you will find ascertainment with respect to the third essential, ascertaining a lack of true oneness of the self in aggregates. Okay, Mintu's insistently got his hand up, so you get one more question, Mintu, but we're getting near the end, so we have to go quickly. And you have to unmute first.
Yeah, sorry, I just drank a lot of coffee today, so I guess like my mind has a lot of random thought process. going on.
Okay, yeah, don't drink so much coffee. Okay.
So I guess one of the other things when we talk about the self is that even though we cannot say that the self can be wholly with the body, but can we?
Wait. Say again.
So we were trying to say that the self cannot be 100% with the body, right?
But face your mouth toward the microphone.
So we're saying that the self cannot be wholly identified with the body,
Cannot be inherently one with the body.
right?
That's the terminology we're using.
But can we identify the self with some intrinsic part of the body, like our DNA, for example? Because our DNA constitutes, the uniqueness of our mental and bodily properties. Can the self be our DNA?
Okay, so you've got your questions are more suitable for a general introductory course. So this has to do with when we talk about nature and nurture, right? Is the a personality or experiences now the result of my DNA, nature? This is talking about Western point of view, not talking about nature meaning previous lives, but just the DNA, or is it the result of nurture? It's a result of both.
Right.
Behavior, your mannerisms and so forth. There's a certain kind of effect of your DNA on that, and your mind and your body and so forth, but also how you're inculcated. Two children given different environments can turn out quite differently. From a Buddhist point of view, when we talk about nature and nurture, really what we're talking about is not on that gross level. We're talking about on the subtle level of the nature that you're given, the innate qualities that you're given from previous lifetimes, karmically, that can affect your personality right now. Some children from youth, they have a hammer and they like to beat on the ants, the insects on the ground and kill them. They get joy in that because they have an innate tendency of disrespect for life and so forth, and the welfare of others. Whereas other children, if they see an animal being harmed, they cry. So that's innate. Then there are other kinds of qualities that are inculcated, by developing wisdom or bad qualities. Let's leave that. I just want to, otherwise we'll never finish the text. Fourth essential point is the next thing. Now, you might think that the I and the aggregates cannot be anything but different. Why? Because you've already understood the provision that if the I inherently existed, it would have to be inherently identical to the aggregates or inherently different than the aggregates. We've already refuted on the third essential point that they could be inherently identical, inherently one. Now, you might think that the I and the five aggregates cannot be anything but different. Here, the crucial word that's left out and here is understood is inherently different. Chandrakirti's Madhyamaka Vatara, chapter 6, 120, says, there is no self other than the aggregates. There is no self different than the aggregates because apart from the aggregates, its conception does not exist. This is in a nutshell. You can prove very quickly. You might say that conventionally, let me ask, conventionally, where's Alex? Is Alex still up there? Did Alex leave?
No.
Oh, there you are. Alex, is the conventional I one with the aggregates? Conventional I.
Is it one with the aggregates?
Yeah.
I would say yes. It's not different. Well,
yeah, the conventional I is different than the aggregates.
there.
Yeah, it's not one with the aggregates. Otherwise, you'd have the same problem. You'd have to say I my body. You couldn't say my body if it was the same as the aggregates, but it is conventionally different than the aggregates because the I is imputed upon the aggregates. Right, Paul? You follow? Yeah. The I is conventionally different, but if you talk about inherently different, the I is not inherently different than the aggregates. It is different, conventionally different, but it's not inherently different. There is no self other than the aggregates. That means inherently other, inherently different, because apart from the aggregates, its conception does not exist. So you can't have a conception of I without depending on the aggregates, you know? The inherently different must be non-related. We were talking about before about Devadatta and Yajna. The inherently different must not be not related. So now Ashley and Mintu are forbidden from asking another question because no one else has asked any questions yet. So you have to wait till afterwards. The inherently different must be non-related. If two things are different and inherently existent, they would be totally unrelated. They would have no relationship whatsoever. Therefore, just as within the aggregates, you can identify each individually, conventionally, right? You can say the form aggregate, the feeling aggregate, and so forth. This is the aggregate of form and so forth. So after clearing away the 5 aggregates, you would have to identify the I. If the I was inherently different than the aggregates, when you took away the form aggregate, you took away the feeling aggregate, discrimination, compositional factors, consciousness aggregate, you would be able to identify the I. But there's no I to identify. If other than those 5 aggregates, there's no way to identify an I. So after clearing away the 5 aggregates, you would have to identify the I, saying, this is the I, something that's left. However, no matter how finely you analyze, such an I is not at all to be found. You can't find an I that is unrelated to the aggregates. How can you say, for instance, if there were an I that was inherently different than the aggregates, this is the 4th essential point, that whether the I could be inherently different. If it were inherently different, it would have no relationship with the aggregates, so that if someone stuck a needle in your arm or you were bit by a wasp or something, you would not say, oh, I've been bitten, because the I would be unrelated to the aggregates, would be totally inherently different than the aggregates. It is not sufficient that the mode of non-finding be just a repetition of the impoverished phrase, not found. For example, when an ox is lost, one does not take as true the mere phrase, it is not found in such and such an area. Rather, through searching for it in the highland, the midland, in the lowland of the area, one firmly decides that it cannot be found. Here also, through meditating until a decision is reached, you gain conviction. Chandrakirti's Madhyamaka, this chapter 6 is the chapter on wisdom. Verse 165 says, because there is no object which does not have an agent, there is no mine, M-I-N-E, possessive, without a self, an owner. Through the view of emptiness of I and mine, a yogi is liberated. So we're just putting on the first layer, of paint. When you paint your room, you put on a primer. There are a lot of things that look like Ashley and Mintu or someone else who say, oh, I can see some contradiction there. I can see something from the old, some other mistake there. As you hear these teachings again, you contemplate upon them, you read the teachings again, receive teachings. It's like putting on the second coat. Maybe even it needs a third coat of paint, on your wall before it looks, proper. So don't feel distraught if you still have some doubts. They will be eliminated. So let me stop there. We'll do a little dedication, and I will remain on. I wanted to end now because it is 8:30 and some people have other obligations. I will remain on after the dedication. We can discuss some more and ask some more questions. So, Sunny, can you put up the dedication prayers? Okay. So think, during this time, we've created some virtuous karma, which maybe we have some faith, maybe you don't have any faith, that it will ripen on our continuum in the future. Maybe not this lifetime, maybe future lifetimes. In fact, from a Buddhist perspective, from the Mahayana perspective, definitely this is the rationale of the Bodhisattvas in collecting virtuous karma, to be able to have access to resources in the future to help sentient beings, to have the continuity of mind that's been ripened as a result of our virtuous karma now. So think we've created virtuous karma now. Think, due to these virtues, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead each and every living being without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel, precious bodhicitta that has not arisen, arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Think whatever ways that this karma ripens in the future, may it become the cause of my continued spiritual development from life to life, culminating in my achievement eventually of enlightenment, from which state I can effortlessly, spontaneously, and without error lead sentient beings out of suffering into that very same state of an omniscience. Okay, thank you. So those of you who have some other obligations, skadoodle. I see Mary Kata has her virtual hand up. Mary, what's your thought?
Well, I was wondering, if when you successfully meditate on these 4 points, are you left with a conceptual understanding of emptiness, or can it also bring you to a direct perception of emptiness?
So when we talk about realization of emptiness, in the Gelugpa tradition, we say that you cannot have a direct perception of emptiness without having preceded it with a conceptual understanding of emptiness. A little bit like this. Right now, we don't perceive some phenomena we don't perceive directly at all right now. They're obscured to us. The direct realization of them obscured to us. You might say like veils, like obscurations in the mind. We can have a mental image of emptiness in our mind, what that means, but our mind is not realizing that directly. It's still called a realization, a valid realization, conceptual realization of emptiness, but it is by means of a mental image of emptiness, as though the actual emptiness and the mental image of emptiness are mixed, and we cannot perceive right now the actual direct realization of actual emptiness because it's obscured by some mental image and other obscurations. By continuing to meditate on emptiness, on that mental image, as you accumulate merit, virtuous karma, acting as a support for realizations, as you do purification practices, purifying negative karma from past lives, which are karmic obscurations, it's as though the veils, let's say in the haram of the ancient kings or whatever, the consorts would have different veils in front of them, many veils, so that other people couldn't see her face. So it's like removing those veils to see the prajna paramita, the epitome of the female paradigm of wisdom, right? Removing those veils slowly. How does one remove them? By meditating with a union of tranquil abiding and penetrative insight on emptiness. The Bodhisattva on the path of preparation. We talk about 5 paths: path of accumulation, path of preparation or connection, path of seeing, path of meditation, or what do we say, familiarity, and the path of no more learning, the 5 paths, like in the Heart Sutra, gate, paragate, parasamgate, bodhi. Bodhi is like the path of no more learning. It's like graduation. You don't have to do any more practice. So on the path, the second path, the path of preparation, the Bodhisattva has an intellectual understanding, conceptual understanding of emptiness. And by applying the combination of penetrative insight and shamatha, single point of concentration within which you are able to analyze without losing that concentration. Again and again, it's like taking away, the function of that is to remove the veils, remove the obscurations to direct realization. And as one approaches the path of seeing is when you have a direct perception of emptiness. As you're approaching that, the final obscurations are removed and your former correct conceptual understanding of emptiness is transformed into direct realization of emptiness.
And you get that by continuing to meditate on the 4 points? Like, how do you go from conceptual to direct? Like,
Yeah, this is what I'm saying. So this is what I'm saying. You would have, when you've realized emptiness, that means you've already succeeded in using these 4 essential points. You've recognized the object of negation. You've realized the pervasion. You've ascertained with valid cognition the pervasion, and either that such a self would either have to be inherently one with the aggregates or inherently different than the aggregates. You've investigated those 2 possibilities. It couldn't be inherently one with the aggregates because of these absurd consequences, these fallacies. It couldn't be inherently different than the aggregates because of these other fallacies. Therefore, you're left with the conclusion then that the self that you've previously assumed to be existent, the supposed inherently existent I, doesn't exist at all. Because if it did exist, it would have had to be inherently one with the aggregates or inherently different with the aggregates. At that point, you have a realization of emptiness, conceptual realization of emptiness with a mental image. You're approaching emptiness by means of what's called a meaning generality in one's mind. It's something that is appearing in your mind, which you don't focus on. It's like, say, for instance, I've given in other contexts example. Remember these things you had when you were a kid? There was a, what are they called? It's sort of two little glasses that you put on, and you have a little card you put in with a positive image of the Tower of London or the Empire State Building or something, or the Grand Canyon.
A stereoscope, I think. George.
Stereoscope, there you go. So your eyes are, it's as though you're seeing the Grand Canyon or the Tower of London out there, but you're looking through this image. You're not actually focusing on the image, you're looking through it, and it's as though you see out there in the distance. That's not a bad example of this first conceptual realization of emptiness. It's as though you have a mental image like that positive slide in front of you. You're not focusing on it. You're using it as a vehicle to realize emptiness, which is as though out there, but you're not perceiving it. You're not perceiving emptiness directly. So that's the stage and the path of preparation. Then you continue meditating on that with a union of tranquil abiding and penetrative insight, analyzing again and again in deep meditation without other distractions. And in between sessions, you accumulate merit, you make prostrations, you engage in the Bodhisattva's 6 perfections, you purify negative karma, you do prostrations to the 35 Buddhas, you do Vajrasattva, purifying meditation. And as a result of that, you accumulate a strength of mind that is able then to eliminate these obscurations, that the mental image becomes more and more transparent. So before you were seeing emptiness via the mental image, finally the mental image disappears. It's like saying removing the veils in front of the woman's face, and you finally see emptiness directly. I can't see your face, Mary, so I can't tell what you're thinking.
I'll have to think about this. I'm going to listen to the recording of the class on YouTube. But thank you so much for teaching, and I'm definitely joining the Illuminating the Intent class.
Okay, good. So, someone else have a question? Oh, Poon King, good, Singapore. I didn't see you before.
Venerable George, thank you. I would like to clarify whether my understanding is correct, that the I is inherently not one with the aggregate. Yeah. And then that is the third essential. The fourth essential is that the I is not inherently different from the aggregate.
You could say it that way, or you could say an inherently existent I. Hypothetically, there's no inherently existent I. If an inherently existent I existed, it would have to be one with the aggregates. And because it's that inherently existent I has that title, that adjective in front, inherently existent, it would have to be inherently one with the aggregates or inherently different than the aggregates. You could just say, if an inherently existent I existed, it would have to be one with the aggregates or different than the aggregates. Then you could stipulate that because the I that you're investigating hypothetically is inherently existent, it would have to be inherently one with the aggregates or inherently different than the aggregates.
Yeah, I think, thank you so much. Because I got stuck a little bit on the I being not inherently different from the aggregate.
So if you say it that way, You can say it that way, but it's presupposed that you're, because of the first essential point, recognizing the object of negation. What have you recognized? An inherently existent I.
Yeah.
It seems like the I is inherently existent. It's appearing that way to you. It's appearing to be inherently existent, and your mind is believing in that. It's assenting to that appearance. You know, like the child's believing, you know, Paul walking down the stairs dressed as Santa Claus, believing that it's actually Santa Claus, whereas the adults know that that's not actually Santa Claus. So it's all predicated upon recognizing the object of negation, the appearance of inherently existent I. Then, if that existed that way, if it existed as inherently existent, it would have to be either one with the aggregates or different than the aggregates. Or you could say, as a result of it being inherently existent, it would have to be inherently one with the aggregates or inherently different than the aggregates.
I think that would be much clearer, because I think the first point, inherently one, not inherently one with the aggregate, that's relatively okay. Is the second one that I thought maybe double meaning. There was a thought crossed my mind that since it's not inherently different from the aggregate, it will be the same, at least conventionally, with the aggregate. The second point.
No. So
No.
What do you mean the second point? The fourth point, you mean?
The 4 point, sorry, the 4 point.
Yeah. So if it were
The third point, clear, but
Okay.
the fourth point.
So the fourth point, if it were, so we've already, the second point was we established the position. If it was inherently existent, it would have to be either one with the aggregates or different than the aggregates, or you could add the word, it would be inherently one with the aggregates or inherently different. So the fourth point, we want to show that it is not inherently different than the aggregates. So this is where we get into the logic that if it were inherently different than the aggregates, it would have no relationship to the aggregates whatsoever. So you wouldn't, why would that I in space somewhere in the cosmos, why would it be looking at these aggregates and concerned about the welfare of these aggregates? It could be just as interested in someone else's aggregates if it was inherently different, right? If your body is hot, you wouldn't, if the I was inherently different than the body and mind, you wouldn't say, I am hot. There would be no reason for the inherently different I, totally unrelated I, to say, I am hot. So there is some relationship between the aggregates and the I. They're not inherently one. They're not inherently different. The conventional I is not one with the aggregates for the same fallacy that we talked about here. There would have to be many I's. Also, the fallacy that you couldn't say my aggregates if they were one and the same. But the imputedly existent I, the conventionally existent I, is conventionally different than the aggregates, but it's not inherently different than the aggregates.
Yes, that's the point.
Different, conceptually different, but it's not inherently different.
Yes, I think that's the second point. Thank you so much for your explanation. That second point was clear. The conventional I is not different from the aggregates. It's not different.
It is different. It is different than the aggregates.
The conventional I is different from the is not the same as the aggregate, but
right.
is different from the aggregate
Right.
conventionally.
Conventionally
you.
different. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you, thank you,
Okay.
thank you,
Okay.
thank you.
So Sean Ashley has another question, but before, is there someone else who has a question who hasn't asked? Someone else? Paul, you don't have a question? Okay. Okay, Sean. So Sean, I don't know, Sean, your name is Sean Ashley, or Ashley's your wife, or what?
No, it's Ashley Sean, but
Ashley Sean. Okay.
my credit card has my full name. So
Okay. Okay. So what's your question?
well, I still was questioning about this. So when you were talking about this subtle mind, that I guess the vehicle is the wind, which of those five, would any of those five aggregates that you're talking about still exist at that point?
Yeah. So any consciousness, even the subtlemost consciousness, has five omnipresent mental factors. So feeling and discrimination, and the other ones would be called compositional factors. So the subtle mind has four aggregates, and the subtle wind constitutes the form aggregate. So it's important to know, when we talk about impermanent phenomena, I think I mentioned not too long ago, if you talk about impermanent phenomena, there are three kinds of impermanent phenomena. Form or material, like say the form aggregate. Consciousness is also impermanent, but it's different than form. From a Buddhist perspective, consciousness is not a derivative of form. You can't make consciousness out of form, as maybe Western science would think that if you put, in the DNA together and in an embryo, because of that physical thing, that somehow the epiphenomena of consciousness will arise. Buddhism says that's not the case. Consciousness is of a different continuum of material. Whereas material can transform into energy, E equals mc squared. You can cause matter to disappear and appear as photons or something else. You can't cause matter to transform into consciousness, nor can you have consciousness transform through its own continuity, transform into material. The third kind of impermanent phenomena is called non-associated compositional factors. That means it's a compositional factor that means it's impermanent, but it's not associated with body or mind. It's neither body or mind. What would be an example of that? The self, the conventional self. The conventional self is not the body, is not the mind. It's imputed upon the body and mind. There are other kinds of things that are compositional factors, also time, other things that are neither matter, material, form, nor consciousness. So,
but wouldn't they, it still seems like you'd have to have some kind of interdependence between consciousness and matter, or they wouldn't be able to interact.
Yeah, they are. So when we talk about, let's say, relative truth, conventional truth, and ultimate truth. If something is a conventional truth, it can't be an ultimate truth. If something is an ultimate truth, it can't be a conventional truth. What's the correct term? Dichotomy. In the same way, if something is mind, it cannot be matter. If it is matter or form, it cannot be mind. But the two are inseparably, let's say in the subtlemost mind and wind, they're inseparably joined. They're inseparable, yet they have their own continuities. They're one entity with different conceptual constructs, form and consciousness. Same way, ultimate truth and conventional truth. There is no ultimate truth which is not inseparable from a conventional truth. Let's say the my eyeglasses, conventional truth of the eyeglasses. The emptiness of the eyeglasses can't be found separate from the aggregate, the glasses. It's inseparable with the conventional truth of the eyeglasses in the same way, well, not in the same way, but in a similar way that form and consciousness are related. So even in one consciousness, within our body right now, there are various consciousnesses, eye consciousness, ear consciousness, so forth. They all have a supporting wind, which is the form counterpart. They're never, you can't have a consciousness that is separated from a form, yet they have their own continuities. They are different. Okay, something to think about. So that's your homework for next week.
Well, one other, you had also mentioned that, like, for example, with the eye consciousness, you said you couldn't have two eye consciousnesses. But what about people that have undergone split brain patients where their two hemispheres of their brain have been surgically separated, and each eye is receiving different stories based on which hemisphere is getting that information?
Okay, that's something to investigate. I don't know.
Okay.
So anyone else have a thought, question? Okay, so we'll stop there. What time is it? Oh yeah, good. It's close to 9. Please enjoy. Think. I have to put on my glasses to see the names again. So Larry's going to be thinking about continuity of self. Different people have different things to think about, and we'll continue next week with our last class. And hopefully we should, if we go fast enough, if there are not too many questions, we should be able to finish. And so I will see you then. Thanks so much for participating.